Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Jason again, talking about basic soccer stuff for those who are looking to get into the sport and learn more about the various aspects of it. In this one, I'm going to be talking about American versus British terms used in soccer. I'm going to be making another video later about, I think, universal terms that everyone just uses, like what is a false nine? What does it mean to be in someone's pocket? What is a Rabona? But all the ones in this video are going to be about terms that Americans use that are just different than the British, even though they mean the same thing, and being familiarized with that. So relatively short, easy one. The next one might be a little bit longer. I might split it into several parts, but this one's about those differences that we use around the world.
They would get you, wouldn't they? They would understand you. And your stuff's pretty universal, I feel.
You say they'd understand me. The thing about Americans that I've thought about the language is that they say they speak English, but they've had to change it to make them understand it more.
So first of all, I definitely want to say that there is no definitive right term one way or the other. If you're from England, you're going to use one term.
Why do the Americans insist on calling it soccer? Why do they have such a problem calling it football? It's a game played with a ball that is struck with the foot. Hence, football. You see? Are you following this, America?
If you're from the US, you're going to use a different term.
It's called soccer. Go USA. You guys are going to do it.
Anyone giving you a hard time using one term versus the other is honestly just being an elitist snob. If you're in the US and you're talking about soccer, it's okay to call it soccer and not football. It's not a big deal. And even if you're in England and you're using soccer, someone's going to make a joke about it, give you a hard time. But honestly, everyone knows what you're talking about. It doesn't really matter. So don't let anyone bring you down based on the terms you're using. Personally, I tend to use the British terms for the most part. That's because I'd say around half the people I even talk about soccer with are international and they're used to the British terms. And also I follow European teams and international soccer where the British terms are more often than not just used as the standard. But if I'm talking with someone in the US about an MLS team, yeah, I'm probably going to use American terms. It's just easier. But again, there is no right or wrong. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The first one I'm going to start with is the big one. It's soccer versus football. It's the one you're going to get the most slack about. But again, there really is no right or wrong here. It's the only one I'm going to talk about at length and detail. So bear with me for about a minute or so here. Soccer, as you know, is what we call it here in the US. It's also what they call it in Canada, in Australia, and in Ireland. So it's not just an American thing. The rest of the world, as you know, calls it football or some version of it, which makes sense. It's a sport played with your feet and a ball. But all that being said, soccer is actually originally a British term. So if anyone ever gives you crap, you can always throw this back in their face. Back in the day, in the late 19th century, there was rugby football in England and there was association soccer. It was still called football, but it was also called association soccer, which then became a soccer, which then became soccer. It was a term very, very widely used in England, along with football, pretty interchangeably. And only until the 60s or 70s was it actually completely eliminated. When rugby football just became big enough, it was just known as rugby, and then football just became football. Soccer kind of went away as a term. But soccer has been used in England as a term longer than it hasn't been. So trust me, it's okay to use it. No one really should care about it. In the US, though, obviously, football was pretty big by the 60s and 70s, the American football. So that term was basically taken. So soccer just stuck. That's why we have soccer here and why England uses football. But again, no right or wrong. It's okay to call it either one. Some other random ones that I think are worth calling out really quickly. The idea of a club versus a team. In the US, we call it a team. In England, they call it a club. And I think the reason for that is it's more than just the players that make up the actual squad. It's everything. It's the history around it. It's the community. It's the stadium. It's the youth training team that they have. It's really about more than just that professional elite final 11 squad that goes out there. The club is really, this goes back to like old English days when soccer has a much, much closer history to local communities than professional sports do here in the US. There are hundreds upon hundreds of professional soccer clubs in England versus only a couple of dozen professional clubs for any given sport in the US. And so those clubs really historically, especially before like TV rights became a big thing, they were really, really dependent upon local communities to literally support them and make sure they're doing all right. There was a really close connection with that local community and the club itself. I'm sure if you've watched shows like Welcome to Wrexham, you can kind of get an idea of what that's like. And that even goes further to things like the idea of a supporter versus a fan. We call ourselves fans of any given team in America, but in England, you're called a supporter because quite literally until recently, you were literally financially supporting and keeping that club alive. So the idea of a supporter is a pretty big one for them. Also, the idea of a fan is actually kind of a semi-derogatory term for them. I think a lot of British people will call foreign fans like myself a fan and not a supporter because I don't literally go to the grounds every week. I don't pay the club my money to like directly to them. I do pay via TV rights and I do go out to Europe quite often actually to watch them, but that doesn't really count, nor does waking up at 4 a.m. to watch the team. Really to them, it's you're either a local or you're not, and it is what it is. But they call their local fans supporters versus fans, which is what we say. Other random ones, these are not really as important. We call games games, they call them matches. And I actually had to look this one up. A match is actually any given game versus a fixture, which they also use kind of interchangeably. It's actually a very specific scheduled game. So a fixture will be the specific game you're watching next weekend versus a match is just any soccer game that's being played. Kind of random. I don't think anyone really cares, but I looked it up, so now you know. Another random one, kind of not too big of a deal, but I thought interesting is in the US, we always list the away team at a home team. So the Oakland A's are playing at the San Francisco Giants. Now that makes sense because in baseball, the away team bats first, so it makes sense to list them first on the score sheet. But that doesn't really matter at all in basketball and football, but we just kind of followed that way of listing the teams. It's the opposite in England. You will always see the home team listed first before the away team. So when you see Tottenham Hotspur versus Arsenal, you know it's at Tottenham Stadium and Arsenal are the visitors. Kind of the opposite of how we do it here in the US. Another weird one is the idea of a draw versus a tie. Obviously, we use the word tie when a game ends in an even score. Not too common for any of the major US sports, but in soccer, obviously it happens. They do not use the word tie over in England. They use the word draw instead. The reason for that is tie means something else in England. Let's say you're in a knockout tournament and Tottenham is drawn against Arsenal in that tournament. That is called the tie. So the tie is Tottenham and Arsenal. They'll then play a match and then we'll see what the game may be. It may end in a draw, but never in a tie because that's used as differently. Kind of worth knowing. Also, I keep mentioning Tottenham and Arsenal. Those are two huge teams that are known to be big rivals of each other. I don't think there's an equivalent for this, but a big rivalry matchup over there is called a derby. It's spelt derby, but it's actually pronounced derby. But like, I don't think you call the Yankees versus the Mets or the A's versus the Giants a specific thing. We have nicknames for them like the Subway Series or Battle of the Bay or Battle of the Bridge, but there really is no term for a rivals playing against each other in the US that I know at least. In England, it's called a derby, worth knowing. So if you ever hear of the North London Derby, even though it's spelled North London Derby, that is Tottenham versus Arsenal playing. Another big one, this is news to me, maybe it's actually more known, the idea of a coach versus a manager. In the US, I've always used those two terms pretty interchangeably to mean the same thing, but that's not the case over in England and for their soccer teams. A coach is definitely a lower tier than something like a manager. A coach is someone that determines who will be playing, who is the starting 11, who's on the bench, who didn't make the bench at all, what is the lineup, the tactics, the formation. They're in charge of practices and making sure a specific way of playing is the new team style. That is what a coach does. A manager does all of that and more. A manager is also in charge of determining what players to sell, what players they want to buy, how much that they will pay for a player like that. Now, they probably won't do that alone. They'll probably work with other people in the front office to manage that, but they'll have a much bigger hand in determining what that'll be. That's a manager versus a coach may just be given players and say, hey, we signed this player, figure out how to use them. So different tiers, coach definitely a little bit lower than a manager in the structure of how teams are set up. Other random ones are kind of worth calling out. The idea of a kit over in England. A kit is technically the entire uniform. It is the shirt, it is the shorts, it is the socks. Really, most people, when they say kit, they mean the shirt, the top. That's what we usually call a jersey or a shirt. But over there, if you do hear the word kit, people are usually referring to just the jersey itself. Also, what we call cleats, the actual like soccer shoes with the actual studs in them, they refer to as a boot. I have no idea why. I didn't look it up, but you'll hear the word boots. You'll know what they mean. It's the cleats. Other random things we're calling out, what we call a field, the soccer field, they call a pitch. No one out there calls it a field. I always call it a pitch myself, but that's the difference between us and them. We say field, they say pitch. Similar, we also always say stadium. They really almost never use the word stadium over there. It's always the ground. Stadiums obviously have their own names, but in general, a term for any given stadium where a team plays is always called the ground. And last one, again, really kind of minor, small. When we call injuries, people getting hurt, when people kind of leave the field, they just call it a knock as opposed to an injury. I don't think I've actually ever heard the word injury while watching Premier League. It's always a knock. People obviously get injured, but like just kind of the slang people use is like someone got a knock, they're going to be like out for a week or two. I don't know. So those are the first random terms I thought I'd kind of come up with. I'll be making definitely, like I said, another video with a lot more terms that are kind of more universally known that you should definitely know as far as like slang that everyone uses pretty globally, and that you'll have to know if you want to be able to like talk with people about it. But that'll be another video. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you later. Bye.